thought about. Many, perhaps most people, are barely aware of and utterly uninterested in most of the selected ideas, which, however, are part of the background of shared wisdom or folly, against which even the indifferent lead their lives. In 3 respects, mine is unlike any previous writer's attempt to narrate the history of ideas. First, I include the underexplored problem of how and why we have ideas in the first place, why, by comparison with other selectively similar animals, our imaginations bristle with so many novelties, probe so far beyond experience, and picture so many different versions of reality. I try to use revelations from cognitive science to expose the faculties that make us, among comparable species, exceptionally productive of ideas. Readers uninterested in theoretical pourparlers can skip to page 33. Second, instead of following the usual routine and relying only on written records, I start the story in deep layers of evidence reconstructing thoughts of our Paleolithic ancestors and even, in the limited degree the sources permit, reaching for ideas that came out of the minds of cognate or preceding species of homonyms and hominids. Among revelations that will, I hope, surprise most readers are the antiquity of much of the toolkit of ideas on which we rely, the subtlety and profundity of the thinking of early Homo sapiens, and how little we have added to the stock of ideas we inherited from the remote past. Finally, I depart from the convention of writing the history of ideas as if it were a parade of the thoughts of individual thinkers. I cannot avoid mentioning Confucius and Christ, Einstein and Epicurus, Darwin and Diogenes. But in this book, the disembodied ideas are the heroes and the villains. I try to follow their migrations in and out of the minds that conceived and received them. I do not think that ideas are autonomous. On the contrary, they do not, because they cannot, operate outside minds. But they seem intelligible to me only if we acknowledge that genius is just part of the systems that encourage them, and that circumstances, cultural contexts, and environmental constraints, as well as people, play their parts in the story. And I'm interested as much in the transmission of ideas through media that sometimes pollute and mutate them, as in their parturition, which is never immaculate. There is no one way of tracking ideas across time and cultures, because in pace, direction, and means, their migrations are so various. Sometimes they spread like stains, getting fainter and shallower as they go. Sometimes they creep like lice, drawing attention to themselves by irritating their hosts into awareness. Sometimes they seem to fall like leaves on a windless day and rot for a while before they start anything new. Sometimes they get airborne, zooming in erratic swarms and alighting in unpredictable places, or they succumb to the wind and get blown where it listeth. Sometimes they behave like atomic particles, popping up simultaneously in mutually distant places in defiance of normal laws of motion. The story matches the matrix of history in general, as ideas, like cultures, multiply and diverge, pullulate and perish, exchange and reconverge, without ever, in any sustained fashion, progressing or developing or evolving, or gaining in simplicity or complexity, or fitting any other formula. In the early phases of the story, all the ideas we know about seem to be the common property of humankind, carried, unforgotten, from a single culture of origin over time and across migrants' changing environments. Increasingly, however, for reasons I try to explore, some regions and some cultures demonstrate peculiar inventiveness. The focus of the book, therefore, narrows, first to privileged parts of Eurasia, later to what we conventionally call the West. Toward the end of the book, other parts of the world figure mainly as receptors of ideas, most of which originate in Europe and North America. I hope no reader mistakes this for myopia or